Dr. Manu Chaudhary. I'm an infectious diseases physician at Rainbow Children's Hospital. And on the behalf of Voice of Healthcare, I welcome all our panelists and our viewers.
Been a good learning curve and good experience so far. I'll be happy to share this with all.
Wonderful. Dr. Sudipto Das, could you share your
Hi, good morning. I'm Sudipto Das. I have done my MBBS and basic studies from India and had medicine and ICU experience there. Subsequently got trained in medicine in the UK and have done rheumatology specialist in Leeds. And currently I'm a consultant in University Hospital of Derby and Burton. My interest is the immunopathological process that goes on in this kind of infection. And hopefully I will be able to contribute. And hydroxychloroquine, which has been most talked about drug, we are one of the avid users. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to discuss.
Wonderful. Do we have Dr. Chabra on?
Yeah.
So could you kindly, yes,
me.
Please introduce yourself.
I am Dr. Aram Chabra, Senior Consultant Physician at Fortis Hospital, Shalimar Bagh and Feroz Hospital, Rohini. And I am past chairman and secretary of the API Delhi State Chapter. And at present, I am the governing member of the API National. And I had been the treasurer and the governing member of the CSI Delhi. And I am the founder and the past president of the North Delhi Physician Forum.
Wonderful. So we have wonderful set of people with us today. I shall start with the questions. If our viewers want to ask us any of the panelists some questions, they can post it on line, and we'll try to answer them as the session is going on. So I would like to start with Professor Wali. Could you comment on current crisis we are encountering with COVID-19? Is this going to be, end of the year event, or is it going to be something we'll see every year like flu, or is it going to be, or would it be just once in lifetime how SARS and MERS we encountered with Corona epidemics in the past?
Well, I would better not call it a crisis. I would call it a big educator to the mankind, to the world, and to all of us. There is so much we are learning from COVID episode. And if you go back to the history, such things were not uncommon. And in the past, we have faced bigger crises than this one, and we have come out. And we will also come out from this crisis. Truncating the answer to your question, I have no right to predict, but I have a right to suspect that we have to learn to live with COVID for a long time. We have to change our attitude to the life, and we have to see something new as an addition to follow and to practice. And what we are changing today gradually, it would change also subsequently in our day-to-day behavior, in our learning process, in our methodology of treatment, seeing patients as a doctor. And if we go back, we have a lot of 14th century Italy-Venice experience. And when everybody was quarantined, I'm starting from that. When the ships used to come, every ship was quarantined for 14 days. So this is not new. And 3,000 years back, 20 crore people used to die of a smallpox. And lots of episodes which have taught us that larger number of lives were lost than this, at least in India. And this is part of this, I would say, is man-made crisis. I'm not talking about the virus. I'm talking about what we did for the Mother Earth and what Mother Earth is teaching us a lesson. In a broader perspective, I'm talking. And it's just like remembering to remember from the past.
True. Yeah, so totally agree. I think this is going to be part of our lives, and if not Corona, we'll see other infections coming in with the kind of stress we are giving to our Mother Earth. Totally agreed, Professor Wali. Could you also share your view regarding how our country is ready for our healthcare system is ready for this crisis or this COVID-19 pandemic? I see you don't like the word crisis. And what have we learned from other countries so far? So Italy, US. Could you share your point of view there?
I keep saying to the people, first of all, India has done everything which is required. We are not lagging behind. But the onus of this lies to the country who had it first. When you see the visual in any program, you see the trolley full of blood bags in the Chinese hospital. You see dialysis machine running. Nobody has pointed out yet. Trolley going with blood bags, dialysis machine running, and people are being treated that way. You also happen to see the initial videos of people lying on the road, falling on the road, being given cardiac massage on the road. You still remember seeing the videos of people being dragged out of their houses. So what is this? The country which had it first, it is the duty of that country to let the world know what the country is having and to let the WHO know what is happening. And I remember speaking on COVID, and when it was not called COVID, it was called SARS-CoV-2 or Chinese virus or Wuhan.
Novel Corona 2019 is, yeah. And
I used to wait for the next day what WHO is saying about the pandemic, and 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, we were waiting. No, nothing was come out. And at that time, I became very suspicious. Something is wrong somewhere. I'm not complaining against WHO or China, but it took unprecedented delay for the world to know what is happening, whose fault is this, their agency is going to fix it, not my job. But what we are suffering little bit is because of the delay in getting the inputs from the WHO. And WHO, of course, would not give us input unless WHO gets the inputs. So I'm very neutral on this subject, that the WHO would tell us only that much which the WHO would be provided. That is what I'm trying to come on to the point is that despite the India got information, the world got information after a long gap of what was happening in Wuhan. We have still prepared our country to fight this menace, and we are fighting it well. There are enough beds. The Harshvardhan's statement, Dr. Harshvardhan's statement says we have more than 1 lakh beds dedicated to COVID. We have about 600 hospitals. And one example you see just now, Dr. Sushila Kataria, how efficiently we are treating the patients without making any fuss, and we are successfully treating them. Then our doctors are talking about the plasma therapy, and it has become a world's hit yesterday. And the UK is talking about the vaccine, and same way, there are things which are being talked about, like in Israel, they are talking about the placental cell therapy. And even in Noida, a place like Noida, Sharda Hospital, they are talking about stem cell therapy. So this all combined, we have everything to do if required. But human lives should not sell cheap. This is the second part of the second side of the coin. The poor people and those who need to have food, those who need to have jobs, employments, money, they should not be neglected. And for that, probably our government has taken adequate steps and they are managing the show. But still, I see that more on this should be done. Our Prime Minister is trying to get it done, get it implemented, if not implemented, if it is done and not implemented. And we are trying to help people, like we are trying to remove students from quota. This is one example. And then we are trying to open some shops, like today's statement of the government. So all we are well prepared by the ventilator count, by the mask count, by the PPE count. We are well prepared, and we have to give a good message to the world that we are on the giving side, we are not on the taking side. We have been generous in supplying the hydroxychloroquine to more than 26 countries of the world, and so on.
Perfect. So totally agree. We are so our healthcare system seems to be very well prepared, I think, but our citizens have to be should not get complacent with knowing that, yes, we are well prepared. And we'll touch that on point. So moving to Dr. Sushila, could you share your point of view, how our private laboratories and our private hospitals are ready for this pandemic ongoing?
See, the role of a private sector cannot be underestimated in this set, because we know that majority of the healthcare in India is still provided by the private players, be it small or big hospitals. So we have to be prepared, and there is no demarcation between the government and the private institutes right now. Everybody is shouldering their responsibility and is actually doing their bit. As far as labs are concerned, we have those ICMR approved labs, and we are sending our samples, because of which, the turnaround time of the test has really reduced. We're planning to have one in our hospital, which would be functional by Monday. As far as the role of hospitals is also concerned, we know that, government sector cannot do everything. So private sector is shouldering responsibility. I can't comment upon the whole national scenario, but what I can comment is on the Delhi NCR and the part where I live. We are at a hospital which was, requested by the PMO to look after the Italian tourists. And after that, we have been looking a lot of national patients as well. And a group of 4 hospitals in Gurgaon have come forward to adopt one hospital as a purely COVID hospital. So this is a kind of first experiment where, people from different hospitals are coming together. They're sharing their resources, they're sharing their human resources, and as well as the equipment and other costs also, just to make that the things go smoothly. And if you cohort patients at one place, this will help in efficient utilization of PPE, and the protocols can run more smoothly if you have one kind of patients. So I think private the healthcare is contributing its full share.
Wonderful. So seems like our private sector is also well prepared. I can speak for Rainbow Children's. We are running mock drills every day, though at least in Bangalore, we are not seeing much of even suspect cases. So we've still not entered that community spread at a level which we are seeing in Gurgaon and Mumbai and Delhi. Probably not much in Gurgaon, but definitely Delhi. So seems like even our private sectors are, up in the game. Thank you, Dr. Sudipto, for joining us from UK. We really appreciate. Next question is for you. Could you talk a little bit about, there are various subtypes of this virus which we are encountering. So maybe shed your light on that aspect, and as well as this whole shielding that is currently being implemented in UK, and could this be replicated in India, and should we be replicating this herd immunity concept here?
Thank you for your invite, and I've heard to my previous esteemed colleagues how India is coping. As regards to your question about the various subtypes of the viruses, the recent paper about the phylogenetic studies what they have been trying to do is to track the viruses. They have essentially divided into 3 patterns, A, B, and C. The A part is thought to be originally came from the bats. And then there are a couple of patients in Yongdong, which is not Wuhan. And there are a couple of genes tracked to USA and Australia. The main subtype that was found in Wuhan was the B type, which is the Southeast Asia predominant subtype found. And it hasn't crossed, apart from 19, all 93 patterns are found within the subtype, within the Southeast Asia. And the C subtype has predominantly, these are all mutations from A to B and B to C. The C is mainly found in the Europe, both France, Italy, UK, Germany. There are some other subtypes. So they are mutating and changing quite a bit. As regards to the herd immunity is a concept where you see people get exposed to a particular infection when it is naive and they get infected. Some people get better and gradually it gets transmitted among people so that we can protect the people who do not have immunity, like newborns or elderly people. The herd immunity concept initially started, but if you look at the transmission rate or infectivity rate, probably the infectivity rate is slightly lower in terms of this virus if we compared it to something like mumps. but then the case fatality rate is quite high. So if we solely live on the herd immunity concept, we will be overwhelmed by the cases and none of the healthcare system will be able to cope. So hence, everybody has moved away, UK has moved away from the herd immunity and started this social distancing and lockdown and everything to get the curve down. Otherwise, everybody will be overwhelmed. There is no country in the world which will be able to cope. One of the concepts which Sweden is doing, they have adopted a herd immunity kind of modified concept, but if you look at their death rate, which is around 2000 compared to Finland and Norway, which is in its 100. So questions might be raised later on. The other way to improve the herd immunity is a vaccine. And vaccine is in very early stages of development. There has been a lot of media attention about that. There are 4 stages of development of vaccine. And the initial is the preclinical stage. Most of WHO has said we can skip that. So most of the production or vaccine trials that are going on, the initial stage has been skipped. The USA and the Chinese trial, they have done the phase 1 trial. Oxford has started and combined phase 1 and phase 2. So first phase is to try and see how the immunity is developing. Initially, few good, easy volunteers. Then it is the phase 2 where a big number of patients are given, and the stage 3, and it is given in a wider population and followed up. It takes time. Even if you cut corners and combine phase 1 and phase 2 to see whether we can produce it quickly, then what you have to do is next step is to do combine phase 2 and phase 3. And still it takes a little bit of time. Usual outcome is about, if you want to look at the genuine outcome, it takes about 6 months. So I'm not talking about any timelines here. I'm just giving you a practical thing, what tends to happen. If when phase 1 and phase 2 is combined, you will get a quick results, and then phase 2 and phase 3, there will be the modeling that is being done worldwide. There will be ethical questions raised about that. Because what the thought process is in phase 2 and phase 3 combined, probably they will vaccinate, and this is I'm saying from hearing, I should not be quoted on this. We will have volunteers vaccinated in phase 2 and phase 3, and there might be a situation where they will be voluntarily allowed to expose to the virus so that we get the results quickly. That's all I'm going to say. So this is going to be a phase 2, phase 3, if they try to shorten it out. And this is the main concept that is going on in the vaccine development at the moment.
Yeah.
So nearest, we have to be hopeful how quickly we are going to get it.
New Zealand, they are doing it same way.
Yeah.
They're getting the volunteers to expose themselves to the virus. They're injecting them. They're moving on the roads with virus.
Yes. Yeah. So there is a big ethical dilemma, but it's a war-like situation. And I personally don't see any problem with that. But there will be discussions about this, how this will be implemented.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you, Dr. Sudeep. Though I think we are trying anything and everything, but this is, tough times, make us innovate the new things. So we'll see. As you discussed, it probably will take around 12 months at least if we cut corners for the vaccine to come and help us with the herd immunity. Now moving on to Dr. Sushila again. Could you share your personal experience of managing these COVID-19 cases at Medanta? Just a brief overview. What kind of patients you're getting? How are they doing?
So out of these 53 patients, about 5 to 7 patients initially, the 2 we tried to manage, create an ICU-like situation in the room also. So that's why the discrepancy, whether it's 5 or 7. So actually, let's consider if we had opened ICU initially, it would be 7 patients out of 53 in ICU and rest in the ward. 2 patients have expired because of COVID-19 infection. One lady, after clearing the virus, she had a gut translocation of the yeast, and then she died of candidemia-related septic shock. And another one died of a severe ARDS, which was related to the COVID-19 infection. In out of these, about 30%, 15 patients have been mildly symptomatic or not symptomatic at all. So initially, when we had patients in early March, there was hardly any protocol, and we were also, test and try and learning ourselves. So for the asymptomatic and mildly ones, we just gave symptomatic treatment, and for the patients who were like in little sicker category, we started with lopinavir, ritonavir, because that was the talk of the town at that time. And then for few patients who went into cytokine release syndrome, I have used tocilizumab. So I used tocilizumab for 3 patients, of which 2 survived and one, that lady, died of a complication later on. Right now we have over the time we have formed our standard protocol, and then now it is easier for us. We have a standard protocol of investigations, how we do, how often we repeat it, and what is our treatment. So my first line treatment is hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and we measure QTc. So if anybody who has a QTc less than 420, we give without any hesitation. If it is more than 420, between 450, then we do daily ECGs, and we ideally do not give beyond 450. That's being a little bit on more conservative side, because guidelines say even up to 500 you can give. Now this is what, but the medication is just one part, because these are the patients who are going to stay with you for 2 to 3 weeks and sometimes even longer. So you need to take care of their emotional needs, their nutritional needs, and you need to fight boredom. For all the patients who have limited mobility, I use low molecular weight heparin. We give oxygen early. As soon as the oxygen saturation drops below 95, we rather give them oxygen and keep them comfortable. Most of these patients are never like, as hypoxic as a patient of pulmonary edema would be. So I would agree with the terminology which says silent hypoxemia. So yes, these patients are mostly silent hypoxemic, and only one single thing which helps you in monitoring. I don't do CT scans of these patients, because why expose the CT scan area to this? I just monitor their vitals, and most important is oxygen saturation and an initial CRP. If I see on the baseline, if somebody's CRP is high, I closely follow them. Those who have a normal CRP, we can be a little more relaxed about them. And oxygen saturation is one thing which always helps me to differentiate, because these patients may not be sick when they present to you. It is about a week to 10 days time when the immune response starts building up, then they deteriorate in front of your eyes. So this is a time, and a close monitoring is very important. This whole discussion takes us whether we should even be trying to kill the virus, or we should just modify the immunity. That's what my rheumatologist colleague would also agree. And we are doing a randomized controlled trial for tocilizumab, for which we have got the approvals from the GCI and our ethics committee. So we will be starting a multi-centric tocilizumab trial at multiple places. Similarly, we haven't used any steroids, because role of steroid was globally very controversial. It could have led to increased infection. So I haven't used. I have seen some sporadic reports coming here and there, where they say use of early steroids may be helpful in preventing ARDS, but I would not take that chance, because ultimately after an initial feel good factor, you might just worsen and the patient has infection, all those things. We do not give antibiotics primarily until unless we see an evidence of secondary bacterial infections, and I have closely observed these patients with their procalcitonin levels and all that. Those patients who are on prolonged ventilator for more than a week, you can find some VAP or other infections growing into the blood. But majorly those patients who are not intubated and you don't have many invasive lines, they do not have secondary bacterial infection. That's my experience. And a simple thing as oxygen saturation and CRP, a progressively increasing CRP, I heavily rely on these patients when to escalate my treatments. As far as the treatment for pooled plasma, we have now a host of people who have been discharged and they're good and they're candidates. We have informed them and we have got ethics clearance for the ICMR trial on seroconvalescent plasma. We would be doing this, but so far I haven't used in any of my patients, because the plasma is harvested at least 2 weeks after discharge. So you can't just harvest the plasma immediately after discharge. So my cohort of patients who have been discharged, now they're post-discharge 2 to 3 weeks. My first group of patients was Italian patients, and then they left the country. So I don't have the opportunity to harvest their plasma. So this is what I do actually.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that was wonderful. Professor Vali, would you want to share your aspect as well?
No, I have a very good listening from Dr. Kataria, and I have two questions. Sometimes we have an overlap of swine flu cases coming along with these cases. So this is one thing, and I'm talking about swine flu purposely because in RML Hospital, they are giving a coverage by anti-swine flu drug like Fluvair, Oseltamivir. This is one. And second is, Dr. Kataria, do you had some occasion to use diuretic on some of your patients? Just, it's a question. And in which group of patients you have used low molecular weight heparin and for how long? You mentioned about it, please.
Thank you, sir. So for low molecular weight heparin patients, all those patients who would otherwise be a candidate for low molecular weight heparin because they have a limited mobility and they are in hospital. So I use low molecular weight heparin for all of them actually until they are discharged, till they're mobile enough. For other younger people, I give them a exercise schedule, which they have to follow every day in the room, like 15 minutes exercise 3 times a day. And, you know, I devise, make it a little funny and all that. And I circulate to them on, I make a group of my patients and I WhatsApp group and I keep on, sending these messages, though it comes with a lot of, burdens. Patient will say, today, Khana, the food was cold and all that. But I maintain a group where I can communicate to the patients on these tiny issues. So as a blanket, I do not give to everybody, but for all my elderly patients who otherwise in the hospital would have required low molecular weight heparin. Secondly, for your question on diuretic, no, I haven't used diuretic per se for COVID-19, but yes, one of my patients was a chronic kidney disease patient and he had a fluid overload and his dialysis got delayed because of technical reasons for some time. So I did use it, but I would rather do an ultrafiltration and take the dialysis. And the first question was use of Oseltamivir. We have run a multiplex PCR, which we call BioFire on them. In their throat swabs, and I have sometimes some rhinovirus here and there, but I haven't found H1N1 and COVID-19 together. And because a BioFire is a costly test, so we did it initially in 5-10 patients. In my hospital, it costs more than 10,000 rupees, so I want to save the money of the patients. And people were using Oseltamivir basically for COVID-19 in higher doses, but it has not shown any effect. And using too much of antiviral immune modulator, they do have a drug-drug interaction. So I don't use it. No, I don't use it.
So I agree. I can share what we have for now decided for our pediatric patients. We will be using hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Hopefully through a solidarity trial from WHO, we will get some remdesivir, the antiviral everybody is talking about. My colleagues at in US who in Boston Children and CHOP, they are using remdesivir and they are having wonderful response to these medicines there. Fortunately, kids make a very limited population of these severe COVID cases. So it seems like they are more of carriers for the elderly and not really getting affected themselves much. So yeah, seems like that is kind of a blanket approach we are following as what Dr. Sushila talked about. Dr. Sudipto Das here, she talked about immunomodulation. Do you want to shed some knowledge in that aspect? Would you have some info?
I would like to say that if you look at how the infection spreads, first there is a kind of 2-3 days period when people get infected and nothing tends to happen. And then some people recover and right day 10, 8, 9, 10, and some people get worse. So if we strategically divide this and then see what happens immunologically, the current modeling that has been proposed is to something to do with the hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis kind of model, where in the first stage there is immunosuppression because the interferon beta group is suppressed. So that is the viral effect. So that is the immunosuppression stage. If we give any immunomodulator at that stage, like probably steroids or any other IL-6 or cytokine drugs, that will be harmful for the patient, probably. This is based on model. That's why the studies needs to come in. This is where the stage, my belief, is where the antivirals and the hydroxychloroquine drugs needs to be affected. And then, as Dr. Kataria said, you monitor the patient, how things goes. if they get a cytokine surge, that is usually tends to happen day 5, day 6 gradually, and it can be monitored by CRP. Some people do ferritin. These are surrogate markers, as well as in some of our hospitals, they do D-dimer for different reasons, because one of the latest pathology studies shows that there is some microthrombi process going on. So some of the hospitals are implementing a sliding scale based on the D-dimer. But I think that's when the cytokine surge starts. If you can locate and start the treatment with whatever cytokine suppressing system you need, it's mainly the IL-1, IL-6, or you can use the eculizumab or the beta interferon, that would probably help. Unfortunately, the studies we are going in a pandemic. All the studies that are designed, WHO is doing the trial, and in UK it is mainly the recovery. WHO doing the solidarity in which there are viral arms as well. UK, but it hasn't got, I think, the tocilizumab arm in it. In UK, we are mainly doing the recovery trial, which has got, it hasn't got the remdesivir, but the other 2 antivirals along with azithromycin, but they are all in separate arms, and tocilizumab is one part of it. French are doing a similar study called Discovery. So we'll have to wait and come out and see. I think we will not, it's my hunch that we will not get a direct answer until sub-analysis of these studies are seen, and seen at what time point this has to be done. It has to be a coordinated effort between all the people who are doing the studies and find out a cure while we wait for the vaccine. It might not be a cure, but might be a process of slowing down the whole thing.
True. Thanks, Dr. Sudipto.
My question
just
to Sushila, if a suspected case returns to be positive, would you like to give the HCQ and azithromycin or the antiviral to that patient? Asymptomatic patient comes to be positive.
So that is a question. I said that over the time we have evolved, and we also know that most of the asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic patients would recover on their own, but we do not know out of which who would deteriorate. So using an early, my approach is using it early is helpful. So I would not wait for them to deteriorate and then use. Right now I use it upfront, and a little analysis of my data shows that it does help in viral clearance, which is coming out statistically significant. So I, yes, use it for all my patients now who get admitted.
So I think that is the approach where, you attack with, decrease the number of viral load with your immunomodulation with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, so they don't go into that cytokine storm. I think that is probably what everybody is thinking about. Is there, Dr. Sushila, have you seen L and S subtypes? Like, are you getting that data? Are you finding something interesting?
Yes, that's also important. And I was also initially wondering that my 2 patients were deteriorated, similarly at the same time. And one recovered and one didn't recover. And that was a time when I did a CT scan on both the patients. So actually one patient who just got better with high frequency oxygenation and increased oxygen saturations. And another one was, we were finding even to ventilate in supine position, so we were proning frequently. So yes, this phenotype is there, and obviously the L type are doing better than the H type. Here I also want to add, this is my personal opinion, and I would like to have the opinion of the panel also. Looking at the pathology of how the virus attaches to the ACE2 receptors and all that, in my patients, and my patient has been at least 50% of them are above the age of 60. So it has been a high risk population. It's not a very young population. I have found that the patients who, for their own reasons of hypertension, dyslipidemia, and diabetes, were on ACE inhibitors, they did very well. On the ARBs, actually, not ACE inhibitors. And patients who were on statins also did good. And DPP4 inhibitors also. So it could be a long-term cumulative effect. I don't think we can use it for immediate treatment purposes, but at least if we could have a data of all those patients in different countries who have died, how many of them were actually on ARBs, statins, or DPP4 inhibitors, an answer to this question can come. I couldn't find one. If anybody in the panel has this answer, I would like to be enlightened.
Well, Dr. Kataria, with Dr. Ram, we are writing on a paper on this RAS blockade, and which will be published very soon. What we found was initially people stopped ACE inhibitors when they came, and then we found that actually, as you said, more appropriate ARBs, they are working better. Of course, with those patients who are on ACE inhibitors, they should not stop ACE inhibitors. That was the first thing which came out from Italy as a research paper. And then we gave the reference of that paper also in our paper. This is, of course, the first paper from India will be coming out, and I'll email you that contents. The other thing is, you very rightly said about the L type and S type. Do you remember the person who did well, was that from India and the S type was from Italy, like that?
No, in both
Because
ways it was. I
Okay.
had patients in Italian group who were L and H type, and as well as in the Indian group.
You are at the ground, you are treating patients. I have no, for the benefit of every one of us, 3 days back when the health ministry's statistics were coming, and that day Delhi's doubling time was 6.5 or 7.5. Chhattisgarh's time was 34. So there is some amount of different immunities which our different populations have. If that was not the case, the whole slum of Bombay, Dharavi, would have been collapsed by now within 10, 12 days. The kind of infection which these people can have living so close. So there is some sixth sense like thing working with Indian population, with Bangladesh population, with Sri Lankan population, these countries.
Yeah.
And initially 2 theories came up, BCG and
weather,
malaria thing. And they, of course, they are working in France on BCG very heavily. So these are some variables which we should also explore, because our pattern of COVID disease is totally different from the pattern of Europe and America. And had that not been the case, we would have not been smiling sitting here today. So there is
I think,
yeah,
I agree with Dr. Wally. I think we've been fortunate enough to, see this pandemic later stages, so we could learn from other countries. And there have been a lot of speculations about BCG helping, the weather being on our side. And then I think I would give full credit to our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, that we got locked down at a very, very nice stage. We did 2 cycles of incubation, definitely. So we've definitely flattened the curve with that. So I think everything is so far working for us well. Can I ask Dr. Chabda, what do you think about the evolving approach for our testing strategies? We are so limited. We are seeing other countries going, testing most of their population. So do you think we will be seeing this in coming days? How are tracking and quarantine of COVID-19 suspects going to change? Please share your thoughts about that, Dr. Chabra.
Can I have a few slides, 1 or 2 slides?
Okay.
According to this document, all testing strategy guidelines documents, all the suspected case should be tested. A testing strategy and the quarantine of the suspected case, either symptomatic or asymptomatic, because in this case virus, the symptomatic or asymptomatic patients can transmit this virus. Who are the suspected cases? Travel in the outbreak area or the country. The person comes from the red zone, orange zone, or the containment zone. In contact with the positive case, like shared the same flight, shared room, or the long stay with the positive case, or all should be tracked who had come in contact with the positive case, either symptomatic or the asymptomatic. If a person is symptomatic, to be tested on the same day. If he is asymptomatic, to be tested after the 5th day and the 14th day to be declared negative. So, example situation and the management alternative if testing capacity is overwhelmed. Only one case, suspected case with the mild, with the no risk factor registered as a suspected case. He should be home isolated according to the WHO guidelines and do not test it. But if he is symptomatic, then should be kept in the suspected case. So who will track and shift the suspected cases? Do you think all the medical team should be shift the patient or take the patient? No, because they are already overburdened. Non-medical person with the comprehensive training or when with the use of the PP should be trained and should be sent with the patient, because in one hospital there is a rule, one or two doctors should go with the suspected cases. So if the non-medical trained person should go with the suspected, that will reduce the load on the medical fraternity. So all the cases of the suspected case should be tested. Over.
Okay. So thanks. But I think, me and Dr. Sushila was talking yesterday, for now they're saying if you are sending a test, then you should be keeping that patient in-house till the results are negative. So I think, we personally feel at some point we'll have to draw that line where we are, asking these suspects to be home isolated so that there is not a lot of burden on our healthcare system.
The WHO criteria.
No, that is what is
Yes.
not happening in the hospital wards till the test reports have come. You see,
They're
have
making
one
COVID
ward,
centers.
one ICU.
Yeah.
So this is getting mixed up. So and there's no harm actually. There's no suspicion of infection, but you can't sort it out. You see, till the report comes, that's a gray zone. Everybody has to go through that gray zone. If you send them home and they are positive, that's a greater danger rather than keeping a positive patient in the home along with those patients whose report is awaited.
Dr. Rani,
But we have to give...
WHO criteria, he should be registered. He should be.
Yeah, I think
Practically,
it will be tough. I think that accountability by the accountability of the citizens will be very, very important in coming times, because I feel in US they are home isolating, and it doesn't mean they're mixing up with their other co-family members. I think we have to give them very clear-cut instructions how to do home isolation. So probably that would be the approach we would see and not see. We'll see over the time phase, but hopefully with our private labs getting into the picture, we'll have more capabilities of testing more people in the coming days. I know in Mumbai they kind of switched to this model where they are testing all their surgical cases, or even like people who are coming into the hospital. So I think this gray zone will be cleared once most of the people are getting into community spread, is my thought process. Dr. Chhabra, can you also share your thoughts about this immunity post-infection? Like, is it going to be a lasting immunity? We are seeing these relapse cases they're talking about in South Korea. So could you share your points of view here?
Yeah. Immunity post-infection lasting versus less in South Korea. Does primary infection with the COVID result in the immunity? And if so, how long does the immunity last? A study on the animal suggests that primary infection with the COVID may protect against the reinfection. The study was small and did not provide any information on the duration of the immunity. So two studies are there. Two studies after the infection with the SARS-CoV showed sustainable IG level 1 to 2 years after the SARS-CoV virus infection, but it is uncertain whether this finding is generalizable to other COVID virus, and also whether sustainable level of the antibodies provide full protection against the reinfection. Conclusion with these studies, results from the two studies of the antibody level after the infection with the SARS-CoV virus, a similar coronavirus suggests that a high level of the IgG may last for up to 1 to 2 years after the infection. So probable reasons for the positive result in the South Korea, it may be relapse or the reinfection, or maybe due to the decreased immunity from other etiology of the region, or it may be false positive result, or maybe mutation in the virus that changes the antigen behavior. it may be there. These are the probability. So immunity, the status depends upon the plasma therapy of a recovered COVID infection. It is very, very important. It depends upon the immunity status. So in conclusion, it is still early days, and answering the question regarding the immunity after primary infection must wait well-conducted studies with a larger sample sizes using the validated methods. A large number of the antibody tests have been made available after the SARS-CoV-2, but many of these need further validation.
I totally agree. Any of the other panelists would want to add on?
Manu, Dr. Chhabra has got very good information. This is the latest information. I wanted to ask, did they measure the amount of the immunity, these antibody levels? Did they measure IgG, IgM levels at any point of time?
These are very, very short studies, sir.
They did
not
not
at any time. Not particular time.
I mean antibody titer.
Titer,
So-
not information about the titer.
Okay. No, I
So
was
currently we are doing a trial with PHSTI. We are the site collecting centers, and that's an Indian Institute of Government of India. So I think once they are done with this in few months time, they will at least able to tell that how much is the IgG levels, and may not be protective or not protective. By my wishful thinking wants to believe that it is a protective immunity and one doesn't have to go through COVID infection again and again. But I think, yes, our own data from national data will also throw some light on this.
I think the South Korea, there were around 163. There were 163 cases where they tested positive again. Only 61 of them were symptomatic, and that too within 13 days of this whole their initial this thing, they tested positive. And we know the viral can be shedding up till 28 days, so we don't know the viability of these viruses because it's a DNA test, right? So again, we are still in this evolving phase of knowing how immunity is going to last longer. Somebody was talking about it.
Early days to comment on this one. It will take a little bit of time. I would agree with Dr. Chhabra and the panel that we'll have to wait a little bit to arrive at a conclusion, because this virus mutates probably slower than the seasonal flu. The seasonal flu vaccine lasts for about a year. Still, it is not able to protect everybody. There is a small percentage of people that goes out. So going by that, immunity, we have to wait and see how long the immunity, if you get an infection, lasts. So the jury is out for this one, I think.
True. Dr. Sudipto, could you briefly talk about, hydroxychloroquine has been out there. Everybody's talking about it. Seems like a wonderful drug now. So your thought about its current role, its evidence in treatment, possible prophylaxis, please.
I think the panel has already covered most of it. What I would say, we have been using hydroxychloroquine in rheumatology for many years. It's mainly used in the lupus, it's one of our base drugs. Along with that, we also use in rheumatoid, and we also use it in some cases of resistant antiphospholipid syndrome as well. The main function of the hydroxychloroquine, what has been thought to be as an antiviral, is to try and prevent the spread of the virus from the virus attaching it to the body, as well as changing the pH of the endosomes or the lysosomes. Is that pH changing thing which has been thought that it would be helpful in prophylaxis. There are main studies are in vitro studies, which is the chloroquine, and then there is the chloroquine study in Wuhan, which prompted us starting using it. And then there is a subsequent French study along with the azithromycin, which has prompted us using the hydroxychloroquine with the azithromycin. The chloroquine is the base drugs. The hydroxylation of the drug was done because it has led to less retinal toxicity, so that it does not cause the blood retinal barrier, because we use it for a long time. That's a side effect that we look into. And as Dr. Kataria said, it is very important to monitor the QTCs. We have been using it. We haven't come across much of a problem, but in acute situation, when you give the drugs, they might behave differently. That's why monitoring the QTC is very important. And if you combine it with azithromycin, which again prolongs QTC, we have to be careful. And there are certain reports from other parts of the world. The other thing to remember about hydroxychloroquine in terms of the side effects is if there is a G6PD deficiency in some group, it can cause problem. If they are on anti-epileptics, you have to look into it as well. And of course, it is a bit hypoglycemic. So although not very prominent, but it can cause hypoglycemia or potentiate insulin or the other the hypoglycemic drugs. So we have to remember about that. I think ICMR has issued the guidelines regarding the prophylaxis for the healthcare workers. And given the availability of the drug and probably low in terms of the side effects, I personally do not see any harm in that because that would probably help our population. We cannot, in this kind of pandemic situation and with current healthcare infrastructure in India, we cannot afford to lose a lot of people in the healthcare sector. So that is probably a very sensible step. While other countries where it is a lot more evidence-based, people are waiting for evidence, I'm not sure when that's going to arrive. So there are two takes on that. Either you wait for the evidence or you work on whatever you have got. So that, but of course you have to be careful whom you are giving, whom you are monitoring, not to give it below 15 years or children, we have to be very careful. So that's my general take on the hydroxychloroquine. And it's a pretty safe drug. We have been using it for a while. Lots of studies, one big one in USA, we just got an email yesterday asking to participate in the in the exposure prophylaxis, a big study in the UK and Spain. These are the three big studies going on. I think India is also doing. It's a good opportunity to find out the post-exposure prophylaxis. But I think we are not going to get that answer soon because everybody is now concentrating more on the treatment part of it. So that will probably wait, while I don't see any harm in continuing it in people who are at more of risk of getting exposed to the virus. So that's my point of view, looking at all the evidence that we have got.
I agree. I think we're kind of, using the whole concept of malaria prophylaxis into this whole antiviral. I think the levels are wonderful in the blood of hydroxychloroquine, even maybe higher when they looked into the murine models. So I think I personally feel it's a good approach for people who are getting exposed, especially the frontline healthcare workers. But it should not be something which the public should be using. I think
yes,
this is a very clear message I want to give out.
Dr. Das, ECG should be done before giving the SCQ.
Sorry?
It is a recommendation. They say that ECG should be done before giving the SCQ. It is not possible in the pandemic.
No, if there is a history of, we normally don't do baseline ECGs, but if there is a history of cardiac disease, then probably in the current environment, because the heart gets strained in this infection as well, and there are quite a few people getting involved with having cardiac involvement. Whether it is microthrombi causing the case, we don't know. So with that in background, it's probably a good idea, as Dr. Kataria has said, to monitor it when in the inpatient situation when we are using it.
I think in our hospital, what we have done is we are getting EKG for everybody who's going on this prophylaxis. So I think everybody is like super cautious. It's not an expensive modality to get checked. It doesn't take too much of time. I think it's worth just getting it done and then starting the prophylaxis for frontline workers. Can I move to Dr. Wali now? And so we are almost 1 hour into this discussion, so we'll try to take some of the last few points of discussion. So Professor Wali, would you share your thoughts about how can we protect our vulnerable population, especially our elderlies, our children, pregnant females, people living in higher population density areas? Could you share your inputs regarding the same?
Yeah, before that, the antibody titer, when I was asking for, this is important when we talked yesterday too much about plasma. If a person does not have reached the titer of 180 dilution, or best is 1:160, double of that, his plasma is not worth giving as a treatment. This is the fine point we have not talked yesterday. And today also we have been talking. And the second thing, I have been using hydroxychloroquine. Dr. Chabra knows, and he also, for the patients of lupus and rheumatoid patients for many decades. We never asked for ECG from any patient, but it is, we learned from this episode that yes, we were probably doing a mistake and we should get a baseline ECG. The other reason is that this is not hydroxychloroquine per se, which is killing patients and people are writing pro and against. No, please. It's not that innocent tablet which we have used in tons and tons and tons has gone abroad. No, it is the myocarditis caused by the virus itself, which is making heart prone for the toxicity. For any kind of toxicity, even in that case, you give some other medicine, it would show toxicity.
Probably that's what Dr. Sudipto Das said, that, you know, you guys have so much of experience. Our pediatric rheumatologists have amazing experience with hydroxychloroquine. It's the acute situation, how this, you know, there are multifactorial issues that contribute to an overall outcome of a...
No, even troponins have been found in the blood without MI. See,
yes.
Funniest.
Any viral infection actually can cause myocarditis and troponins to go high, I think.
Yeah, but we have been seeing patients falling on the road in the initial videos which our friends have.
Those were fake videos, Dr. Wali. I don't think there was any credibility of those videos.
I will show you some video.
Cardiac massage was.
Can we come back to the discussion? Professor Wali, could you also to the vulnerable population?
Vulnerable population, each one of us is vulnerable. Those who are being treated for some other ailments is equally vulnerable as a 90-year-old lady or male in the house. So all of us are vulnerable. So all of us have to be paranoid to prevent ourselves from the infection. If we don't get paranoid, I'm using this word for last.
Yeah, I don't like that word. I think we should not be paranoid. I think we should be appropriately concerned, elderly, I think.
Yes, elderly at separate from the youngsters and usual precautions. And I have been talking about it a lot, but you see, one word about these kids we are talking. These kids, probably people got confused, even doctors got confused, and there were so many things talked about these kids which came in a big numbers. You know, this is a serology, and these kids were not come to the diagnosis, for the diagnosis. You see, the funniest thing which to me, my mind has happened in Rajasthan, the tested patients for COVID, on them the kids were tested, rather kids being used in the testing. So this is the four things which we have to understand. That first thing, by these kids, by measuring the IgG, IgM, we have to estimate the epidemiological variables at the ground and to deploy the test on the immune health workers, whether they are immune or not, and statistically see them and to assess the effect of non-pharmacological interventions on population as is talked in India everywhere. And those who have a strong response, as I was talking, either you measure the response qualitatively or quantitatively, they should be chosen the candidates for the plasma therapy. This is part of the drill which we have to do in the coming days. And the rest is stay home message again, and let us see what happens in the coming days. It's a Pandora's box. Every day something new.
Yeah, we're getting to know something new. So Dr. Sudipto Das, would you say something about, you know, a lot of people are already on steroids for their underlying diseases. Should they be continuing it? Should they worry that, you know, it lowers our immunity and we are more susceptible? Please share your thoughts about that.
We have been lucky in that aspect. All our societies throughout the world has issued very clear-cut guidance, including the Indian Society of Rheumatology, the BSR, British Society of Rheumatology, as well as the American Society of Rheumatology. Most of our patients, a lot of them are long-term steroids as well as immunomodulators. Our system is quite clear. People who are on certain amount of steroids and or on immunomodulatory drugs, they should be shielding. And that letter has gone out to every one of them. UK government has implemented the shielding policy, where they have identified people who have had transplants, who have had cancer, on chemotherapy, who has severe disease like cystic fibrosis, severe asthma, severe COPD, and inborn errors of metabolism or combined immunodeficiency. There are clear-cut guidelines where people we are sending out letters called shielding. We have been directed to find the patients and send them out. And by shielding, we means 12 weeks isolation. So they stay in home, they don't go out. They don't go out at all. And if they get help, they're advised about social distancing, hand washing. They get help in terms of getting their deliveries in, their food in, their pharmacy in, medicines in, and a range of volunteers has been employed along with family members to help. But under no circumstances they will go out. So this is one of the policies that has been employed. But we are not changing our therapies. People who are on the therapies are continuing on that. And if people need, if somebody has vasculitis, like one of my ladies, she's on long-term treatment of steroids and other drugs, which at the moment is not working. She's flaring. I am going for further immunosuppression in her because we have to treat the condition. We cannot wait for them to get worse. Yes, we are shielding them. We are protecting them. We are not bringing them to the acute sites. We are bringing them to community hospitals if we need to give those infusions. We are taking all precautions. The blood test has been reduced. So they are going on to non-acute sites to have blood tests, or even people are going in their home to have bloods taken. Initially, the monitoring was 3 months. We have extended it to 4 and 6. Like that, every possible way, the vulnerables are protected like in a cocoon until we get that amount of immunity throughout or we get a vaccine.
Wonderful. So the message is basically, please continue what medications you are on. If it's related to your hypertension, your diabetes, or your other immunomodulators. So please continue your medications. Don't stop them.
Absolutely.
Unless you've spoken to your physicians. Yeah, you've spoken to your physicians. And I think the message of, everybody, this is where I wanted Dr. Sushila to comment. What is the new normal going to look like post-lockdown? I think this is something I really want Dr. Sushila to, share some strong points for everybody out there.
So I think it's the lockdown is just a temporary step. It's just a one step in this whole situation, just to curb the fire. But it cannot totally stop it. So even post lockdown, people need to be careful. Like my family asked me, how long it's gonna take? I said it's a long drawn battle. But get prepared till end of July or September. October, September, this is how things are going to be. We have to be more, considerate that, this thing can increase, and parties have to wait. People have to get accustomed to with using lesser things and be self-sufficient. And whenever things they are going to take, the social distancing norm, and I think a general population mask, wearing a mask, even if it is a cloth mask, is must, because that can reduce the transmission of virus to a greater extent. I think our country, which has been, all our primitive practices like putting your shoes outside, taking a bath when you come inside the house, taking the take a bath, and all those things have been very relevant. Now we understand our ancestors were quite an epidemiologist. So we will have to put those things into practice again. Less crowding, no partying, don't go out as if it is not really necessary, and look after the people who are dependent on you. Even if we are going through hardship, try to protect them as much as possible.
True. Dr. Chhabra, would you speak a little bit about what we've seen in the last few weeks, where our frontline workers are being attacked by public? Can you share your thoughts and a message for the masses?
Supporting frontline healthcare workers. Health workers are at risk at two fronts. Some are being infected in the hospital due to the lack of the PPE, and rest are also being infected outside the hospital, in their homes or in their communities. So what are the hazards? Include pathologic exposure, long working hours, psychological distress, fatigue, occupational burnout, stigma, and physical and psychological violence. In India, very, very important, the fear of the violence. So safety of the health worker are at great risk. Adequate provision of the PPE is just the first step. Comprehensive training of the healthcare providers for the use of the PPE. Other practical measures must be considered, including provision of the food, rest, and family support to the health workers. And psychological support is very, very important. COVID stigma should be removed from the society and protect the health worker provider from the violence. It is very, very important.
True.
Safety measure during the sample collection. The person who collects the sample train health care professionals to wear appropriate PPE with the latest free purple nitrate gloves and restricted entry of the visitors and complete the requisition from each and specimen submitted, proper disposal of the waste generated. So who will provide the support? Medical expert team will provide only medical work, duties and affairs, and non-medical teams who will help in procuring PPE, food, other facility, etc. Non-medical workers, duties and affairs. So it should be a teamwork to fight with the COVID-19 with this picture. If the government, health care providers, and public will work as a team, then we can win the this fight.
True. Professor Wali, can you share your thoughts about mental health? I think a brief message to the
Well,
masses.
Mental is very, very important, madam.
Yeah, this is something which has started showing very early in India when a boy jumped from the 7th floor of Safdarjung Hospital, and that was a big eye-opener for all of us, that how people react to this of having this new enemy. And without knowing it well, people have started reacting, and there were many cases after that. There are a lot of cases of domestic violence increasing. I have asked my some counselor friends to speak and prepare some videos and circulate them, that how the youngsters should cope at home. And divorces have increased abroad. And Canada, when making its policy right in the very early days, had put a special clause in their form. Have two departments in there. One is to prevent the crime on the women, and another is that divorce facility. So all these things, they have thought of it and they have kept funding for it. In India, you see, we think the mental health is just not to be attended very strongly. No, it is very, very important. I am saying, when you ask to summarize what has happened, I'm saying in 2 lines that a new world order is going to set down for us, for all of us, and the total world will be recasted, and we have to be prepared for it. And this is a big statement I've been giving from your platform, and we have to be ready for it and learn to live with COVID and COVID's variants, COVID's friends. So we have to live, to learn with this enemy. Probably this enemy would get diluted and we would have herd immunity later. But for the time being, very utmost care is required to conduct ourselves in the society at a big risk of finances. There will be a lot of jobless people after this, as you were asking, Dr. Kataria. There will be lots and lots of people who have spent their all reserves. There will be poor people without food every day in this country, which we should not be shy in saying this. And there will be lots and lots of people who were jobless, youngsters. So the government is trying to think about all these issues, and they would do their best, whatever they can. But it's a global phenomena, how much we can achieve to replenish or to recover and to help the youngsters to compensate the loss of new entrepreneurs, startups. This is a complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue. And I all congratulate the unsung heroes, the colleagues of mine, the people in medical profession, especially our nurses, our doctors, and paramedics, ambulance drivers, the police force, and a lot of people who are unsung, not seen in the front line, who work in the labs, who work behind the scene, who work in the hospital kitchens. So all of us are important, and they need a big thanks and a big clap from all of us. And we have to walk on this difficult path and lockdown traveling would be not phased
True.
out.
Thanks for your final words,
I want to add something,
Professor Wali.
because we have
Professor.
to support all the health workers. As you have seen in one state, 2 doctors were terminated due to a patient run from the hospital. The doctors were blamed. Why? We should support doctors
Too.
and health workers.
True. We have to protect our frontline workers who are, helping you guys to, take care of your family's health. So kindly be more empathetic to these frontline workers. So that's a strong message to the masses. Dr. Sudipto Das, would you give your final, a one-liner while we are trying to close the session?
Yeah, I would agree with Professor Wali that we are seeing a new world order in place, and social distancing and living our life a little bit different way than what we are used to would be the new norm. And again, agreeing with Dr. Kataria, we have to live within our means, do things what is locally available rather than going for things that is extravagant, and probably will have to curve out on our instincts, holidays, a lot of things. But if we have to survive, we have to adapt. And it's survival of the fittest in terms of
fittest. Final. Dr. Sushila, your last few words.
So I think, even if it looks little gloomy outside, but this is for sure, it's not the doomsday. This is not the end of the world. We shall survive, and this too shall be over. So till that time, everybody stay home, stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Chabra, your final words.
Final word, I will tell about the resources something.
Go ahead.
Final word. Resources for the general public. Resources framed or the planned or declared by the authorities from the Ministry of the Health and the Family Welfare, WHO and the CDC, etc., and should be reached to the general public via media, either print or the digital, TV, news or the internet. General public must follow only those resources given by the authority and refrain from the rumors. So these are the few websites you can see from the transmission and the transmission of the disease spread from contact with the contaminated surface of the object, and symptom from this website. And these are the symptoms, how to differentiate the symptoms wise. And this is WHO criteria. And this is social. What is the importance of the social distancing? See, one person can infect 5 days if he is not in the social distancing. And after 30 days, he can infect 406 persons. If he 50% less exposure to the other people, then after 5 days, only 1.2 people are infected. And after 30 days, only 15 people are infected. And if it's 75 less exposure, then only 0.625 people are infected. After 30 days, only 2.5 people infected. That is the importance of the distancing. One, we should tell the people. So that's why the call from our Honorable Prime Minister, Janta Curfew on the 22nd lockdown and extension of the lockdown. So nowadays, there is a reverse of the quotation, probably first time in the history of the mankind. Divided we stand, united we fall. This is the reverse. So hand washing should be given in proper way. Which soap, any soap can be used, but it should be a 20 seconds at least to destroy the virus. Which sanitizer, any sanitizer, alcohol based due to the CDC recommendation. If you use the ethanol, it should be 60% base. If you use the isopropanol, it should be 70%. So cloth mask is enough to is the common public not in contact with the positive patient, but person with the symptom of the cough, cold, fever must wear the surgical mask when going out in the public places. Ideally, they must stay in the home under the self quarantine with the appropriate social distancing from the other family member. N95 mask is a precious resources and should be used only with the health worker who are taking care of the COVID-19 patients. So don't follow or believe the fake news or the resources or any media or the print media, except if you follow these things, see the this advertisement, the cervical cancer से बचने के लिए cervical की photo दे रही है. So Media and movies makers make news for the sale and movies for the entertainment respectively, make movies on the controversial issues without any evidence, make mockery the noble profession of ours, and make unreal fact to the real fact. So that will lead to this picture. Patient always wants to kill the doctor. If kill the doctor, then he will kill himself also. So this is the scenario of today. ये ठंड से नहीं मरेगा लेकिन एहसान से जरूर मर जाएगा जो पॉलिटिशियन कर रहे हैं हम चैरिटी कर रहे हैं उसको क्या कर रहे हैं इन चीज़ों का ध्यान रखना चाहिए मेडिकल टीम कैन गिव द सर्विस इन द मेडिकल फील्ड अदर शुड कम forward and increase the manpower after training for the COVID fight crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chabra. I thank all my panelists for sharing their expert opinions today. I thank all our viewers who joined us. I think I'd like to conclude the session. I feel information regarding COVID-19 is evolving, so stay updated with the right resources, as Mr. Chabra, Dr. Chabra talked about. Ministry of Health has beautiful videos, helpline numbers, posters which you can go through. They have a comic book for children, so if you had to explain to your kids what's going on, kindly use that, because this is a new lifestyle we are getting used to. Our healthcare system is prepared to handle the crisis as we are responsible citizens. So we have to ensure social distancing, usage of mask, hand hygiene, even after the lockdown is uplifted. And I feel like this behavior has to be continued by end of this year. I think we're going to see these spurts of cases even till end of this year, till we have a good vaccine with good immunity. What we do today as a community will affect generations to come. Resilience and empathy will be our cornerstones to face this together. The world probably will never look like the same how it was, but this is our opportunity to build a responsible and a better world. So thank you all.